This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 210 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today is an episode about why travel helps us really understand the world. This is a bit of a passion topic of mine, as you will soon learn. And it's a special solo episode because it's episode 210. And as you know, on these round-numbered episodes, I do something different just to vary things, both to keep you guys on your toes and just to give me the chance to do something new, I think, as well. Now, I actually asked in the Thoughtful Travellers group about several different ideas I had for this episode, but I got so much feedback, like lots of different varied feedback and lots of great ideas, I couldn't really pick which one I was going to actually record. And then earlier today, I was sitting out near the river and I realised that actually what I wanted to tell you all about was I was a part of a big project I've been working on recently. So that is where we're going to be talking about why travel helps us really understand the world. Now, I know I've briefly mentioned it before, that I'm working on a book about thoughtful travel because I feel like I have a lot to say about thoughtful travel. And this book is especially, well, it's about how travel has changed me in many ways, but also how academic research proves that it's not just me and that travel is really important for changing us in lots of different ways. And the book is full of stories that show these changes, of course. And in fact, I have had so much fun in the last few months looking back over my decades of travels, looking through photos, looking through journals, digging through my poor brain, which seems to be overloaded, trying to find the best stories to illustrate all of these ideas. And I have had kind of lots of rediscovery, so some of those will feature in today's episode. I guess, broadly speaking, so the book looks at how travelling helps us understand ourselves better and how travels give us opportunities to grow and for self-development. But that's kind of the internal side. It also looks at how it increases our understanding of the world and its people. So I think we often talk about how we can personally grow from travel on the Thoughtful Travel podcast, but I think we tend to talk less about how much we learn about the world, and I think that's just such an important part of travel. So I want to focus on that today and just share a few of my own stories. Because I think it's all very well to learn about the world from, lots of sources, books, documentaries, films, all of that kind of great input. It's all that is valuable, but there's something really tangibly different about actually being out there in the places where important things have happened, talking to real people from different cultures and different countries. There's kind of no substitute for that kind of learning. It's just a very different and special way, and that's how travel can help us really properly understand the world. So I'm going to share a few of my stories of that ilk today. But before I do, I have to confess I actually found the full audio file of my theme music this week for the bits that you hear at the beginning and end of the podcast. I hadn't thought about it in literally years, and it just popped into my head. I was like, oh, where's the rest of that music? And I'd forgotten it's called Sunrise in the Desert, which made me think of my recent sunrise on Mellanby Station out in the West Aussie outback. It seemed that it's such an appropriate name for my theme music. So there you go. And you'll hear some sprinklings of it today between my stories so that it's not just me and my strange Aussie accent droning on. The first story I want to mention about how we can understand the world better through our travels is one I don't want to dwell on because it's one of the worst experiences I've had, and I know that other people who've been to visit the Auschwitz and Birkenau concentration camps in southern Poland near Krakow would agree. It is really an awful, awful place to visit, but so important. Now, in high school, we studied so many aspects of World War II in great depth, and I'd seen lots of documentaries, movies, books. I mean, everything. I felt like I knew a lot about the Holocaust and what happened in concentration camps. And in academic theory, I definitely did know a lot. But really there is nothing that explains the horror as well as actually going there. So it's back in 2003. So yeah, quite some time back, but still fresh in my mind as though it was yesterday. I was backpacking down through Eastern Europe on my way to my job in Bratislava. And one day while I was staying in Krakow, we went out to see the Auschwitz-Birkenau camps. I don't even really want to talk about it. And I know I've mentioned it in passing in previous episodes, but just to briefly describe, I guess, why it was so impactful to me. We went into the grounds and the buildings of Auschwitz. We passed through the Arbeit macht frei gate. Work will make you free. It certainly didn't in that case. And in some of the buildings there's exhibits connected to the prisoners. For example, one room full of their suitcases, and the guide who took us carefully told us to notice the names that were written on them. They were all added with chalk that the prisoners were given when they arrived at Auschwitz. They were all told to write your name on your suitcase so you can get them back later. Of course, the people telling them this knew there was no later. And there was rooms filled with other kinds of different belongings of them, which was absolutely horrific. And we were with this small group kind of shuffling around between rooms, but so quiet. It was the quietest I've ever heard a group of people being. It was just horrific. And after some time at Auschwitz, we were put on a short bus ride down the road to Birkenau, where there's less to be seen. A lot of the buildings were destroyed, but there's still some crematoria there linked to the gas chambers. And I don't even want to repeat some of the stories we heard there, because it's just something that, once you've seen it, it just, I don't even want to discuss it anymore. There you go. That's the end of my story there. One of those kinds of places where being there makes an incredible difference to your understanding of history, to how I think about any of those kinds of extreme events and persecutions. And I had nightmares for days after that, and I still feel utterly awful to think about it. But I think that that's an important thing to know, and an important thing to learn, and an important thing to feel. And I never would have felt that way despite having studied this history in great detail. But being there made this enormous difference, and always will. The next story I wanted to briefly mention of the way I've learnt more about the world and its people by travelling is about racism. Now, this is also not a particularly cheery story, but it is one step up from speaking about concentration camps at least. And it starts off well enough. I was living in Bratislava, and I had met a lovely Japanese guy called Kenji who, crazily enough, was actually studying Slovak literature. He'd moved from Japan to study Slovak literature, so he spoke Slovak well enough to study at that level, like incredible. He also spoke really good English, but he wanted to improve his English, and I was, had just come from Japan, and I really wanted to keep up my Japanese language skills as well. So once we'd met and we realised this, we decided to meet up regularly to have kind of a conversation exchange, or kind of a language exchange event, mostly every week. And we'd go to different cafes, and he'd help me with some Japanese, I'd help him with some English, and he was just, he was a really interesting guy. So we'd always have a good chat. And so I will never forget this particular moment. We had finished off one of our cafe chats, and we were walking back across a fairly big road back towards the tram and bus, wherever, so that we could each go home. It was kind of late afternoon, early evening. And we were crossing the road, and there was someone crossing in the other direction. It was kind of a busy road crossing on a pedestrian light. And at that time, this person coming from the other direction kind of spat towards us and said something like, obviously sounded kind of aggressive, but it was all Slovak and I didn't understand. And Kenji sort of said nothing, and we just kept walking. We couldn't really stop anyway because, the traffic was about to start. But then we got to the other side. I'm like, well, what was all that? And it was just awful. He said to me, well, actually, they were talking to you. And it was basically, and I can't say the words on my podcast because I don't want to use any expletives, but it was basically, why are you speaking to this Asian so-and-so? He should go back where he came from. So they had assumed that I was a Slovak and I could understand them speaking Slovak, and that my friend Kenji was from Asia somewhere, they didn't care where, and that he wouldn't understand them. And they'd said these awful insults. And the worst part for me, of course, was that he had to translate this to me, poor thing. I think that kind of thing happened to him quite often. I don't think it's at all specific to Slovakia by any means. I know that that kind of racism definitely happens here in Australia as well, and probably in many places around the world. And I know I am very fortunate and privileged purely by the luck of my birth to be Caucasian and not have to deal with this kind of stuff so much. But just to be there in that situation reminded me of how prevalent racism is, and just to think that it could happen that way, and I had to get Kenji to translate it to me. Oh, poor thing. But it taught me a lot about the world. So my next story about how travel has helped me understand the world and its people better is a little bit more lighthearted, you'll be pleased to know, and it's about teaching me more about religion. So I grew up here in a, well, I guess broadly speaking, kind of Christian environment. I went to an Anglican high school. My family is not particularly religious and we never really have gone to church and so on, but I kind of have the, a basic enough understanding of Christianity because, obviously I had to learn enough about it at school to get by. But when I was in Japan, then I did learn a whole lot more about the way that the Japanese approach religion. And I certainly don't profess to be an expert in that topic, but I had lots of little experiences and little stories from my friends and students when I was living and teaching in Japan that little by little helped me to piece together some of the things that went on there. And I always remember one particular moment, which was, kind of fun. I had a lovely student and friend named Yoshimi, and she came to class one day and told me that she had a new car. And she had, on the weekend, we're doing that, what did you do on the weekend kind of question. On the weekend, she had taken her car to a temple to be blessed. And at the time, I had never heard of such a thing. And I, of course, had to ask her, tell me more about this. And we'd known each other quite a while by then, so I knew I could ask her to explain it and she would be happy to. So I'd always assumed that religion was like a one-way thing. You have to choose, I am this religion. But I had already learnt from my time in Japan that you could be, a bit Buddhist and a bit Shinto, just picking whichever one suited the situation. So I knew that was a question to ask. And Yoshimi explained to me that this car blessing situation was part of the Shinto religion. And she told me it's really important and that getting her car blessed by the Shinto priest would help her be safe while she was driving. She said it might even stop getting a parking ticket, which I thought was interesting. And that she told me it was quite expensive. You give the money to the priest, you take your car to the Shinto shrine, and he comes and says some special words, and the car is blessed. So I thought that was kind of cool. She did make me promise if I stayed longer in Japan and bought a car that I would also do it. However, I always did find that the Japanese train system was so good I didn't need to buy a car and get it blessed. But that was one of those cool things that I learnt about the world. Now, the last thing about the world that travel's taught me is to do with socialism and communism and the Cold War. So again, something I thought I knew a fair bit about. We studied this in school. I've, watched the news. I lived through kind of the dismantling of the Iron Curtain. So I kind of felt like I knew a fair bit about it. But of course, the perspective is so different when you live, depending on which side you live in or on. And I know when I moved to Slovakia, what really sort of stunned me, and I know it shouldn't, but it did, because as I was growing up and studying history in school, it seemed like this was such a divide. But the people that I met were exactly the same as me, like more so than in many other kind of countries. But, Eastern and Western Europe, there's, really not significant differences. Just they happened to be born somewhere where there was a different regime and an Iron Curtain and all of this kind of stuff, which, especially when I met people like exactly my age who'd grown up with that, with that different experience, and like the Berlin Wall fell when they were teenagers, and then everything about life changed. I mean, it's just a really eye-opening part of traveling. And I remember specifically I had this fabulous student who became a good friend. His name was Bobby, and he was very happy to chat to me in our lessons about all of this stuff. I think, looking back, it was because he didn't want to do any work on his grammar. And he needed a lot of work on his grammar. He's a bit like me in the way I speak German. I just speak German really quickly so that nobody realises that I don't know all the finer points of grammar. And I think Bobby was the same. So he was very happy to distract me by talking about this topic, because he probably knew it was a good one to get me off the grammar train. So, but anyway, I'm glad he did, because he taught me all sorts of things about it. Like what he said, to summarise it, I thought was quite interesting. He always used to say to me it was socialism that they lived with, not communism, like many of us would say. He said because communism is the goal, but probably an impossible goal. He always said human nature would never kind of submit to communism, which kind of makes sense. But also he mentioned frequently that everyone was equal during socialist times, but of course some people were a little more equal than others. And he told me kind of, to me, amazing stories, like he was meant to attend these regular Communist Party meetings, but they were really boring. But, it was compulsory, so he mostly did. But one year, I think when he was a student, he was involved with the local soccer team, and through having lots of training and stuff, he missed 4 Communist Party meetings. And when he then went back to university after, I think, the summer break or winter break or something, he was told there was no place in the students' dormitory for him to live because he'd missed those meetings. So he basically was homeless, which is, not supposed to happen in under socialism, but he was. But apparently he got around it by living there secretly, as many other students did as well. And when inspectors came, because they did, his friends would find a way to hide all his belongings, and they did that for the other people who were living there secretly, and so on. So that always astounded me that kind of stuff was going on. And something that Bobby and many others told me was that they didn't actually think that capitalism was necessarily any better than the socialist or communist system. And even though it comes with a certain freedom, for a lot of them, life had been better in some ways, in many ways, in fact, under socialism. And I saw that in many cases, and, people who had actually quite interesting or good jobs during socialist times, and then when capitalism came along, there was no money for those jobs to be supported anymore, and all kinds of things like that. So life had been much simpler, they would tell me, behind the Iron Curtain. So there's a price to pay for freedom, I guess, is the end result of that. But I had so many conversations about that, and I learnt, first of all, that, what I got taught at school was a very simplistic view of things. And secondly, and most importantly, this is true of everything we learn when we travel, there are so many different sides to the story, so many different ways to interpret things, and so many perspectives that we can't understand until we really get to know the situation a whole lot better. And I think that serves us very well. So there you go, a few stories that I have come across while putting together this book that I'm working hard at, and a few reminders of how traveling out there in the world really, really helps us learn way more about the world. So while we might not be traveling as much as we would want to at the moment, here in Western Australia, we still have a closed border, so we're not traveling anywhere beyond our state at all. There's still a great big world out there waiting for us, and I will be continuing to explore it and learn from it once I can travel again. So thank you very much for listening to episode 210 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. No special links today, but a reminder to come along and join the Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers, where we have lots of fascinating conversations, and I hope that some of these stories will spark some of those conversations as well. Just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook, or there's a link in the show notes. And the show notes for this episode are at notaballerina.com/210. As always, thank you very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.